Imagine you build, like, a machine that successfully solves one of humanity's greatest crises.
Right, a total game changer.
Exactly. It works perfectly, it scales massively, and it produces the exact outcome the entire planet has been begging for.
And you'd think the reward for that world-saving achievement would be massive profits, right?
You would. But the actual reward, immediate, crushing bankruptcy.
Yeah, it's a completely bizarre scenario.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what is happening to China's solar industry right now.
Yeah.
I mean, as the U.S.-Iran war roils global energy markets and nations are just scrambling for secure power, you'd assume the companies manufacturing over 80% of the world's solar panels are, popping champagne.
Oh, absolutely.
But instead, they're hemorrhaging money. Over 40 companies have gone bankrupt, been acquired, or delisted from stock exchanges just since 2024.
Which is just a staggering number. It forces us to look at an incredibly uncomfortable reality about the energy transition.
Yep.
Being the undisputed heavyweight champion of green manufacturing does not insulate you from the brutal physics of the market.
Right.
In fact, it might be the very thing tearing these companies apart.
Which brings us to the big question for you listening today. Think about this. What is an industry's biggest fear after becoming number one in the world?
That's a good question.
Is it the competition finally catching up? Or is it the terrifying possibility of growing way too fast for your own good?
Yeah, that's the real paradox here.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to figure out why the world's strongest solar manufacturing machine is being punished by its own massive scale, and what this whole paradox means for the global energy transition. Let's unpack this.
The context here is what makes this turmoil seem, almost impossible at first glance.
Right, because the demand is there.
It's massive. Last year, renewable sources globally generated more electricity than coal for the very first time.
Which is huge.
It's a monumental, historic shift in how humanity powers itself. And then you add to that the recent surge in Chinese solar exports following the instability of the U.S.-Iran conflict.
Yeah, the demand curve looks incredibly healthy on paper.
It does. The world desperately wants solar.
But getting solar onto a roof and actually making a profit manufacturing the panel are two entirely different games, aren't they?
The foundational business logic of making a solar panel is actually pretty grim for the manufacturer.
How so?
Well, it's essentially becoming a commodity market. A dark gray rectangle of silicon from Company A performs virtually identically to a dark gray rectangle from Company B.
Oh, I see. It's like buying a standard 2x4 of wood at the hardware store.
Exactly. The intellectual property moats are incredibly shallow.
Okay, so if the products are basically the same, how do you compete?
That commoditization dictates all company behavior. When one manufacturer discovers a slight engineering tweak, say, a method to shave a fraction of a cent off the production cost per watt, their competitors reverse engineer and copy it almost instantly.
So you really can't win on unique features.
No, you can only win on volume. So the underlying strategy for every major player becomes identical.
Which is to prioritize scaling up production, right?
Yes. Build multi-billion-dollar gigafactories and just flood the market to capture market share before your rivals do.
But wait, hang on. If I'm a consumer or a utility company or a government trying to hit an aggressive climate target, a price war sounds fantastic.
It's the best thing ever for the consumer.
Right. So why are we talking about ridiculously cheap solar panels like they are a bad thing? Isn't driving the cost of green tech into the dirt exactly what we wanted?
From a societal standpoint, yes, it is the ultimate victory. The fact that panels are practically dirt cheap accelerates global decarbonization immensely.
Okay, so where's the problem?
We have to separate the societal benefit from the corporate balance sheet.
Right.
The structural reality of this market means the victory for the planet is fatal for the manufacturers.
Because everyone is making too much.
Exactly. When every major firm adopts that exact same hyperscaling strategy simultaneously, production capabilities violently race ahead of actual global demand.
And that triggers a massive oversupply.
Huge oversupply. Profit margins collapse entirely, and companies are forced to sell panels below the actual cost of production.
Just to keep the factory lights on.
Yeah, and to hold on to their market share. The industry providing the ultimate green solution is being financially crushed by the weight of its own success.
Wow. So the manufacturers are trapped in a race to the bottom on price.
Yeah.
But even if margins are thin or totally non-existent, surely the sheer volume of the domestic market in China would just soak up all these cheap panels.
You would think so.
I mean, they have a massive energy-hungry economy. Why are we seeing forecasts in these briefs that domestic demand is actually falling for the first time in decades?
Because we're hitting a hard physical limit.
A physical limit.
Yeah. It isn't a lack of desire for clean energy. It's that the physical infrastructure of the Chinese power grid simply cannot swallow any more silicon.
Oh, wow.
They have blanketed their roofs, their hillsides, and their vast western deserts in the solar farms.
They've literally carpeted the landscape. But a power grid isn't a bucket you can just endlessly dump electricity into, right?
Exactly. It operates more like a real-time, highly sensitive supply chain. Supply must match demand precisely, second by second.
Or what? The entire system crashes.
Exactly. You get blackouts.
Right.
And that precise matching is where solar introduces chaos.
Because the sun isn't always shining.
Right. Historically, China's grid was built around coal-fired power plants, which are highly dispatchable.
Dispatchable meaning you can turn them on and off whenever.
Yes. Grid operators love dispatchable power. You need more electricity, throw more coal in the furnace, you need less, you dial it back.
But solar operates on its own rigid schedule.
Right. It peaks violently at noon when the sun is highest and completely vanishes at night.
So the Chinese grid is currently facing a massive tsunami of electricity at midday way, more than the country is actually consuming.
Yes.
Followed by a sudden terrifying drop-off as the sun sets, leaving the grid starved for power just as evening demand spikes.
That phenomenon leads to something called curtailment.
Curtailment?
Yeah. When the grid is overwhelmed at noon, operators literally have to force solar farms to disconnect. The power is just thrown away.
It's completely wasted.
Completely. The data from these briefs is sobering. In January and February of 2026, about 9% of China's entire solar generation was entirely wasted.
9%.
Yeah, that's up from 6% the previous year.
9% of an infrastructure that massive is a staggering amount of energy.
Yeah.
Just pouring down from the sun and being forcibly rejected by the grid.
Exactly. And because of this severe grid indigestion, grid operators are actively pushing back against hooking up new solar farms.
Which means domestic installations are going to plummet.
Right. Industry groups are forecasting the fallout right now. Domestic installations in 2026 are expected to drop by anywhere from 24 to 43% compared to 2025.
A potential 43% drop in their home market. That isn't a dip, that is a cliff.
It's so significant that Bloomberg NEF predicts this domestic bottleneck in China could be severe enough to drag global solar demand down in 2026.
Wow.
That would be the first global decline in 20 years.
So think about this dynamic for a second, right?
Uh.
If the power generated during the day can't be utilized and there's a deficit at night, is simply manufacturing and installing millions of additional solar panels really the optimal solution?
No, it's not.
Because you aren't solving the energy crisis, you're just exacerbating the midday grid traffic jam.
You've hit a domestic ceiling. And
Wow.
historically, when a massive manufacturing sector in China hits a domestic ceiling, the playbook is simple.
Ship the excess abroad.
Exactly. Export your way out of the oversupply.
But looking at these trade briefs, the rest of the world is basically putting up a giant no vacancy sign. The export door is rapidly slamming shut.
It is. And to grasp why the pushback is so fierce, you have to look at the staggering scale of the overcapacity we are talking about.
Okay, let's look at the numbers.
Driven by the frenzied investment we discussed earlier, China has built the manufacturing capacity to produce over 1,000 gigawatts of solar panels every single year.
Over 1,000. Okay, let's frame that 1,000 gigawatts for a second.
Right.
In 2025, the entire planet, including the domestic installations in China, the US, Europe, everyone only installed about 600 gigawatts.
Right.
So China alone has built a machine that can produce significantly more than the entire Earth can currently absorb.
It's unbelievable scale. And as those companies desperately try to export this massive 400 gigawatt excess just to survive, they're crashing into intense geopolitical walls.
Protectionism.
Exactly. We are seeing a global rise in protectionism as countries throw up barriers to shield their own nascent industries.
So we're just trying to report on the facts of this, not take a political stance. But the data shows the U.S. has imposed strict import restrictions and hefty tariffs on Chinese solar products since 2022.
Right, and India is aggressively protecting its domestic manufacturing as well.
It goes beyond just protecting local factories, though, doesn't it?
Like,
The nature of the pushback seems to be evolving from trade disputes into outright national security concerns.
oh, definitely. The EU's announcement in May of 2026 is a perfect example of this shift.
What did they announce?
They announced they will phase out Chinese suppliers of inverters in EU-funded projects.
Okay, wait, let me pause you there. Can you define what an inverter actually is for us?
Sure. So the inverter is arguably the most critical piece of equipment in a solar setup. It's essentially the brain.
The brain of the solar farm.
Yeah. The solar panel generates the power as direct current, or DC, but the inverter is the highly sophisticated software-driven box that converts that DC into alternating current, or AC.
And AC is what the grid actually uses.
Exactly. The inverter communicates directly with the broader national grid to feed that power in safely.
Okay, so because the inverter is the grid's literal gateway, whoever writes the software for that gateway effectively has a potential backdoor into the national power infrastructure.
That is exactly why the EU is treating it as a cybersecurity vulnerability.
So it's not just about panels being artificially cheap anymore.
Not at all. It's about fundamental energy security. Governments simply do not want their critical power grids deeply entwined with foreign supply chains, regardless of the cost savings.
That makes sense. But it creates an incredibly bleak landscape for these manufacturers. I mean, the domestic grid is suffering from massive indigestion, and lucrative foreign markets are raising the drawbridge for security and economic reasons.
It's a perfect storm.
Which begs the obvious question, who is funding this 1,000 gigawatt production machine if the market can't sustain it?
Well, historically, local governments in China acted as the deep-pocketed angels for these companies.
Giving them subsidies and things.
Massive subsidies. They provided cheap land, massive interest-free loans, and endless support to help them dominate the global sector.
But reading these briefs, it seems like that era of state-sponsored invincibility is effectively over.
It really is. The government is executing a dramatic, painful policy pivot right now.
What are they doing?
Instead of propping up struggling, unprofitable zombie companies with endless capital, Beijing and local municipalities are opting to trim the bloat.
They are letting the free market force a brutal consolidation.
Exactly. Take feed-in tariffs, for example.
Okay, a feed-in tariff is essentially the government acting as a guaranteed buyer at a premium price, right?
Yes.
It's like training wheels for a fledgling industry. You don't have to worry about market fluctuations because the state promises you a fixed profit.
That's a great way to look at it. But as of June 2025, the government permanently removed those training wheels.
Oh, wow.
New solar projects are no longer shielded. They must survive on the open market, selling power at whatever the highly competitive, fluctuating daily price happens to be.
So companies went from a guaranteed state paycheck to fighting for scraps in an oversupplied market. And reading through these financial briefs, it's not just a lack of new support. There are actual clawbacks happening. Local governments are aggressively demanding money back.
It just shows how tight local budgets have become. Remember that export surge in March that many people attributed entirely to the U.S.-Iran war?
Yeah, everyone thought it was just a wartime boom.
Well, a major hidden driver of that surge was Chinese solar companies desperately rushing to cram shipments out the door to beat an April 1st deadline.
What happened on April 1st?
That was the day a massive state tax refund on exports officially expired.
Oh, so they were just trying to get the cash before it disappeared.
Exactly. And now, local officials are so intent on cutting the fat that they are forcing companies to return millions of yuan in past subsidies.
They're actually pulling money out of the companies.
Yeah, they would rather let a bloated company fail than keep pouring municipal funds into a structurally unprofitable enterprise.
The psychological shift there is massive. You go overnight from an area of encouraged, heavily subsidized expansion to an era of forced, ruthless consolidation.
And the human cost of that pivot is very real.
Yeah, according to the data we have, roughly 1/3 of the workforce at China's 5 biggest solar firms has already been laid off.
A third of the workforce at the top 5 companies.
It's a bloodbath.
It is. But it highlights a fundamental transition in the global energy narrative. For the past decade, the entire game was about manufacturing scale.
Who could stamp out the most rectangles of silicon and drive the price down?
Right. But the next decade can't be about that. If we have 1,000 gigawatts of capacity and a grid that rejects the power at noon, the focus has to shift entirely to system capability.
The fundamental question isn't how do we make more panels, it's how do we actually integrate and manage this intermittent power?
Exactly. Moving from manufacturing to system integration requires 4 distinct, massive structural shifts.
Okay, let's walk through those. What's the first one?
First, and arguably most critical, is storage. We need unprecedented investments in utility-scale batteries.
Because of the curtailment issue.
Right. The only way to solve that 9% curtailment problem is to capture the flood of midday solar power and physically store it so it can be released during the evening demand spikes.
Capture the flood, release it during the drought.
Exactly.
But even if we store it, we still have a massive geography problem, don't we? I mean, you can't just put a giant battery in the middle of the sunny Gobi Desert and expect it to magically power the cloudy, dense coastal cities of Shanghai or Beijing.
Which brings us to the second shift. Massive grid expansion.
Right.
You have to build the physical pipelines. We are talking about heavily upgraded, high-voltage, direct current transmission lines spanning thousands of miles.
Because the power generation is geographically decoupled from the population centers.
Yes, and reconnecting them requires infrastructure projects on a scale we frankly haven't seen in decades.
And even if you build the batteries and the high-voltage lines, you still have to deal with the legal bureaucracy.
Oh, the red tape is a whole other issue.
The third shift in these briefs focuses on market mechanisms. It's crazy to think about, but in some regions, outdated legal paperwork is literally blocking sunshine from powering a city.
You're referring to the legacy coal contracts.
Exactly.
Yeah, in many areas, grid operators are locked into incredibly rigid, long-term purchasing contracts for coal-fired power.
And those contracts are legally enforced.
Right, so even when cheaper, cleaner solar energy is abundantly available on the grid, the operators are legally mandated to buy the dirty coal power instead.
That is wild.
It is. You have to entirely rewrite the market rules and pricing systems to favor flexibility over legacy baseload power.
It really highlights how the physical technology has outpaced the legal frameworks.
Absolutely.
But speaking of physical technology, the fourth shift is the one I find absolutely fascinating. Technological leaps.
Yes, moving beyond traditional silicon entirely.
Exactly. We are talking about next-generation materials, specifically perovskites.
Perovskites are currently the holy grail in solar research labs. To understand why they matter, you really have to look at the limitations of what we use now.
Right. A standard silicon panel only absorbs very specific slice of the solar spectrum, right?
Correct. It lets a lot of the light's energy slip right through, which is why commercial silicon panels only convert about 22 to 24% of the sunlight that hits them into actual electricity.
Which honestly isn't that much.
Yeah.
So how do perovskites change that math?
They have a completely different crystalline structure. And what's amazing is that it can be chemically tuned to absorb the specific wavelengths of light that traditional silicon misses.
Oh, wow. So if you manufacture a thin film of perovskites and physically layer it directly on top of a traditional silicon panel, you are suddenly harvesting the light the silicon was wasting.
Exactly. You create what's called a tandem cell.
And what does that do to the efficiency?
That tandem approach could theoretically push the conversion rate well beyond 30%.
That's a huge jump.
It is, and eventually it could be much cheaper and less energy intensive to manufacture than pure silicon. It represents a massive technological leap.
But it also highlights the ultimate catch-22 of this entire deep dive, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, with the current market in absolute turmoil, companies bleeding cash, selling panels below production costs, dealing with a grid that actively rejects their power, and watching their share prices plummet to half their peak, how many of these innovative firms are actually going to survive long enough to see perovskites commercialized?
Yeah, that is the dark cloud hanging over the whole energy transition. You could invent the perfect world-saving technology in the lab tomorrow,
Right.
but if the engineering firms and manufacturers meant to scale it have all gone bankrupt because they overexpanded on yesterday's technology, the entire green transition stalls.
It is a brutal waiting game.
Yeah.
So to synthesize all these threads, the narrative we're looking at isn't that China's solar industry failed.
No, not at all.
It is the exact opposite. It succeeded so spectacularly at scaling up manufacturing and driving down global costs that it broke the traditional profit models of the sector.
Completely broke them.
They've entered an incredibly painful evolutionary phase, where the prize is no longer who can build the most panels, but who can actually manage and utilize the power.
They optimized perfectly for a market that existed 5 years ago and are now being violently punished by the physical and geopolitical realities of the market today.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I want you to really ponder the bizarre, counterintuitive reality of this industry. It is a sector where humanity secures a massive, world-saving, wind-abundant, hyper-cheap, clean energy. But the innovators and manufacturers who made it a reality face financial ruin in the process.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It really is. Should a critical industry like this just be left to a brutal free market purge where only the absolute strongest survive? Or does saving the planet require entirely new forms of continuous policy support to keep these companies alive while our physical power grids struggle to catch up?
And as we move into this chaotic next phase of the global energy transition, I'll leave you with a final question to chew on.
Okay, let's hear it.
Considering the bottlenecks we've uncovered today, what do you think is the absolute most critical missing piece we need to fix first?
Well, that's good.
Is it building massive battery storage, completely upgrading our physical grid infrastructure, inventing next-generation perovskite technology, or entirely rewriting our market rules and legacy laws?
Because the reality is we don't have the capital or the time to do it all at once.
Exactly.
Well, it turns out achieving your wildest ambitions and becoming the undisputed king of the mountain is sometimes the most dangerous place to stand. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.